Hi, this is Swapnil Bharti and we are here at the Spinnaker Summit in Seattle, and today we have with us Craig from JFrog. Craig, before we kind of deep dive into this interview, can you tell us what do you do at JFrog?
I have a really interesting role. Instead of being like a core manager of one of our products like Artifactory or X-Ray, I'm responsible for making sure that the things we do with our partners and growing our partner ecosystem are productive. What that means is that I work with our partners to identify use cases that can solve our shared customers' problems and drive whatever work needs to be done to solve that.
Excellent. And we are here at the Spinnaker conference. So first of all, what are you doing here?
Spinnaker is very relevant to what JFrog does as a company. Our mission is to make software liquid. What that means to us is that we create the pipes, the infrastructure that enables builds to go from developers to production systems in as fluid a way as possible. Small builds, frequent builds, and with a constant flow to the endpoints and feedback from runtime systems back to the developers. The software itself, the bits are our focus. Spinnaker is this great new open source project, well, newish open source project that focuses on the last mile and handling the complexity of very heterogeneous deployment environments for many different kinds of applications. A lot of our existing customers are already using it together with our products to do the kind of last mile deployment of software into various environments. And we need to understand more deeply as a company how that works, what we can do to make that better, to add more value for our customers and make make Spinnaker better, make our products better.
So before Spinnaker came, what was that your customers were doing? Were they doing a lot of do-it-yourself thing or mixing with a lot of generalized stuff? What were they doing?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. The predominance of our customers are using sort of Jenkins and Jenkins plugins plus a bunch of do-it-yourself. Boris Rensky in his keynote this morning, if you go watch that, he talked about the role that plays in customer ecosystems and the evolution of this space, and where he sees Spinnaker lying in it. And that's pretty consistent actually with the vision we have. Those solutions are very customer specific, require a lot of specific investments by our customers, and therefore are high cost for them to maintain over time. And the vision of what Spinnaker brings is a more flexible framework that allows it to be opinionated in a way that's very consistent with the values that enable software to be more liquid. So that's really interesting to us, and we want to help our customers kind of transition to that and make it a natural way to work. Do-it-yourself model ends up being brittle over time, because what companies do is they end up creating this sort of infrastructure that's very specific to the way they're organized and their current processes, which locks them into a certain way of working that makes it harder for them to innovate and change their organizational practices and take advantage of the learning that they're doing as an organization. And so, there's some companies where that makes a ton of sense, where they actually have a sort of conscious investment in the do-it-yourself stuff, and that their homegrown solution is a differentiator for them. But that's not true of most companies, right? The actual deployment process itself is, it should become more of a commodity, right? The industry best practices can benefit most of our customers.
But when they were doing all this do-it-yourself stuff, that means they also made a lot of investments.
Sure.
They are just throwing that away and moving to Spinnaker. Is it worth it? Because you have been talking to your customers.
We don't know that yet, right? I think it depends on the environment and the customer themselves and
But
the
you
kinds
said
of investments they've made, right? Like how much of that is actually a differentiator? I think if it's not a differentiator, there's this concept in economics of sunk cost, right? And so when you're making a decision about whether or not you should migrate to some other solution, we have a bias towards overvaluing our past investments, right? And one of the things that I think is becoming more prevalent is an understanding of that and making these kinds of decisions. Whether or not Spinnaker is going to become sort of the de facto standard, none of us knows, right? It's a hypothesis, and that's the essence of why we're here, is to learn about that hypothesis, test it out for ourselves, understand it better for our customers, and how JFrog can fit into this emerging ecosystem and contribute to it.
And you said that a lot of your customers are already using it. So
Some.
that means, yes, some, okay.
Yeah.
So they have already done that evaluation, and they do see that this is the right way, even if they have to reinvest a bit. Because it's open source, it has a larger community around it, and as you said, they can follow best practices. They don't have to do everything internally. They won't have their own lock-in, and they can innovate faster, move faster. So there are so many benefits as compared to, and then when they have their own solution, they also create a lot of technical debt. They have to just, so it makes more sense if there is something.
And that's the hypothesis, right? That we think that may be true. We're going to learn that together with everybody else and come along on this journey together. So, let's take an example. Like Netflix is a well-known referenceable customer of JFrog. Netflix is also the creator initially of Spinnaker, and so they use Spinnaker together with the JFrog Artifactory from the very beginning. So the Spinnaker itself is sort of built to use any artifact repository. It's got this first-class notion of an artifact, and in the way in which Artifactory and other repositories work, it naturally works together. And so the question is, are there ways we can the question I'm trying to answer for myself is, are there ways we can make that better? And I'm sure there are. And here I've started talking to customers who are already using it extensively, using the two technologies together extensively that we did not know of, right? It's a new discovery for us, and I'm continuing those conversations to learn from their best practices, their missteps, so that we can help people not make those same mistakes and do things in a better way going forward. I think the ways we can do that is by making it more natural for the tools to work together in the right ways.
Excellent. But when you meet all these customers here, what kind of what trend you have seen when you talk to your customers?
The principle of Spinnaker encourages people to use immutable packages, right? So you don't want to actually manually touch your systems. You don't want to manually update your packages. You want automated systems that version everything, not just the packages, but all the associated configurations, and then use completely automated processes to actually do the deployment of those. And what that does is that assures reproducibility, it assures rollback capabilities, and that minimizes downtime, increases quality, increases velocity, right? Those are all the great things. What I've learned is that not all of the people who are trying to do this understand all of the capabilities of all of the underlying platforms. Different people are taking advantage of different pieces of these. And I think there are some missed opportunities to take advantage of things. Let's take an example. One example is that a notion in repository management is that you have a single immutable instance of an artifact, and that artifact moves through the software development lifecycle by being made available in different repositories over time. So you may have a dev repo that has all your blessed packages that are allowed to be used by developers for things to get pushed into the CI systems. When that happens and the testing has been done, you've done like your night builds, you'll use a notion of promotion to promote that into, say, a staging repo. And the staging repo is the only repository that your staging systems can read from. And then you'd use another repository like your production repo. You'd promote those packages into prod, and the prod systems can only read from the prod repos. That provides you essentially guaranteed assurance that only the right packages are being used by those systems. It turns out that that's a capability that not all people who are using things like Spinnaker are taking advantage of. And so it makes me ask questions about how we can make it clearer that that's the right way to do things. And there are things we can do like build reference architectures, improve documentation, product features that make it more obvious that that's a best practice. There are a lot of different things that we should explore, and those are the questions that are top of my mind after the conversations I've had with customers.
So here I see two possibilities, two different questions. One is that customers are doing different things that they're experimenting. They're trying to. So how to kind of create an environment where they can benefit from each other's work, number one. Second is that beyond your customer base, there's a growing ecosystem around Spinnaker. How do you plan to kind of engage and collaborate with the larger ecosystem so that you can also benefit? So can you touch on these two different points?
Sure, I think they're actually related. The Spinnaker governance process is evolving and modeling itself after the Kubernetes governance process, which is taking advantage of Linux and a bunch of other very successful community projects. And as such, there now is at least a Kubernetes special interest group within Spinnaker. And a lot of our customers that are taking advantage of Artifactory together with Spinnaker are actually using it to deploy to Kubernetes. That context, the special interest group for Kubernetes looks like a promising place for us to learn and contribute in the community about what things can be done better, what things should be done differently, and where we can add value to the community. The other part of your question was, how do we plan to do it? I don't know yet, but that's my first hypothesis, is to get involved directly in the governance process of Spinnaker and participate actively in the special interest group.
Yeah, that's the second part. The first part of the question was that how do you plan to enable your customers who are doing different kind of things so that they can learn from each other, benefit from? You touched on some points, but
No, I think you're right. That's a great question, and that's something that we have at JFrog. We use several events that we run to enable our customers to learn from each other. So we have an annual conference called Swamp Up in May, and in that conference we bring together practitioners of DevOps from our customers to share their learnings, their experiences, and their challenges with each other and with us. And so that's a main environment in which we would do that. We are also exploring other forums. We might, as we scale, we'll need to do things like user groups and create other forums. We also use things like Stack Overflow. So there are topics around our products in Stack Overflow where people collaborate and between each other, and JFrog employees are also active participants so that we learn from what they're doing well and what they're struggling with, and can and help people along, and they help each other along. So they learn there. That's an active area where we can probably do some things better, and I'll be doing more thinking about that in the near future.
I mean, Spinnaker is open source project, but JFrog has been involved with a lot of other open source projects also. So can you talk about your involvement with the open source projects?
Absolutely. One of the challenges that exists is that JFrog actually, the genesis of Artifactory was a completely open source product. So our initial product was a product that supported Maven and a generic repository, and that remains an open source project. The new capabilities we've added over the last roughly 8 years are actually not open source, and that may change over time, but currently it is a closed source thing. That doesn't mean that JFrog isn't active in the open source community and contributing to open source. We do that in numerous ways. The biggest way in which we participate in the open source community is by providing a set of services that are free for the open source community to use. The most prominent of those is Bintray. So Bintray is essentially a package-specific CDN that we provide as a service that is free to open source projects. So, a great example of using that is Homebrew. So if you use a Mac and you use Homebrew to do package management on your Mac, on the back end, those packages are actually hosted by Bintray, and you're essentially a customer of JFrog, whether you know it or not, but when you're using Homebrew to manage packages on your Mac. We also provide for open source projects, Artifactory as a service for free in partnership with Google. So on the Google Cloud Platform, together we contribute to providing Artifactory as a service to many open source projects. You can go to the JFrog open source page, just Google JFrog open source, and you can find out how to participate and how to apply for the use of those services. When we do integrations with our partners, it's not a requirement that they're open source, but it is true that to date, all of the integration points that we've made are open source, and the integration points in Artifactory. So Artifactory is an extensible platform that includes a CLI. It's extremely powerful. It's a open source Go project that enables you to very scalably and in a very performant way interact with Artifactory in an automated way. Allows you to integrate it with just about any CI system or other automation system. We also have a thing called user plugins that essentially subscribe to events within Artifactory. So anytime an artifact is created or moved or deleted, you can extend Artifactory to do custom actions. So a great example of that is recently we just published the ability to use webhooks within Artifactory for events, and that's an open source user plugin. Our customers often contribute to additional user plugins. So that's one way in which we leverage open source and allows us to sort of internalize what that means for ourselves, and our customers then can see and contribute to and participate in the JFrog community in that way.